This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Houston Astros hitting development coach Andrew Cresci. He discusses his techniques in improving batters' hitting, the inherent nature of failing within baseball, particularly as a batter, and how they can prepare players for this, as well as development pathways and how they manage players' progressions. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Right, so Andrew, I have just discovered that I'm terrible with time zones, so apologies for that. But yeah, how are things over in the States? Are you all good and well?
Yes, sir. No, you're good. I just haven't after living in London for 8 years, I just know all the time zones and no, you're good.
Yeah. To be fair, it should be easier than I've made it with iPhones, and there's no real excuse. So yeah, my bad on that front. Excited for this conversation. Obviously, you had some baseball people on before. I think this would be a really exciting one. Probably looking into, I guess, hitting a little bit, which is kind of an area that I haven't discussed in depth. For people that don't know you, haven't come across your work, do you want to give us a bit of a overview of kind of who you are, what you do, and how you got it?
All right. I guess. So I'm currently a minor league hitting coach with the Houston Astros. Spent a lot of my time at our Florida complex. Last year was here as well. Florida complex was up in Fayetteville, our low A affiliate for a while. Um, spent time working with minor leaguers, some big leaguers in the off season. Prior to that, was over at Driveline Baseball out in Seattle. Through my work there and things I put out got me into conversations with some people in Major League Baseball and was, got a couple opportunities, but chose to come to the Astros because of the people I spoke to. Current Major League hitting coach Jason Kanzler was a big reason why I came over here. Really, really smart guy, especially the rest of the staff. So ended up there or here 2 years ago. Prior to that, played a little bit in Italy. Coached a little bit. So kind of weird path that took me here, but no, I'm enjoying it. It's good.
Yeah, and I think that what's probably unique in American sports in particular compared to European sports is you get those specialist position type coaches. It's coming a little bit more in soccer, for example. We have generically goalkeeper coaches, and we're just beginning to get, I guess, striker coaches that are now coming into the game. So, for you, what drew you to being a hitting coach? What was it? Was it your upbringing coming through playing? Was it just where the passion lay? So yeah, what drew you towards, I guess, wanting to be a hitting coach in particular?
I mean, I was a position player. I got hurt a lot. So I ended up kind of coaching in the summers, especially senior year of college. Tore my ACL, my meniscus, playing intramural flag football, American football. I ended up coaching, kids at a local facility. I coach, little league travel ball. So couldn't really sit down all the time at a desk job. Didn't have the attention span for it. I mean, I worked in finance for a little bit, but that was more so because my dad had done that my whole life. So it was something I grew up with. In terms of becoming a hitting coach, I actually, funny enough, was out of baseball for a little bit. Like I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Like in all sports coaching, it's tough to make enough money to warrant doing it full time. And if you do, you're working insane amount of hours. So for a while, I kind of took a step back, ended up going back to school to get another degree. I was going to go into archaeology, and I ended up going to Italy to go to school when I was like 26, 27. And then kind of happened to by chance through a classmate of mine who I'd asked to help me find like a league or something just to kind of mess around in on the weekends in between classes. And I ended up playing in Italy for a team in Rome for Lazio. Got right back into baseball all over again. And as what usually happens, I got hurt at the end of the year and kind of was at a crossroads and figuring out what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to try to come back and play one more time at 28. And then I ended up the director of a baseball facility in DC, just outside of DC. and that kind of got me back on the trajectory of working in baseball. And yeah, no, it was something that I've always enjoyed doing. Coaching is something that's, as you know, it's fulfilling in that sense, but it's also extreme amount of work, but something that you kind of love, hate sometimes to an extreme. But yeah, that kind of ended up on that trajectory. Almost went back to Italy when I wasn't going to play again, was going to start a performance company over there. Something that, not really a get rich quick scheme, but more so a like, it would have been a cool thing to do and you make enough money to live. But, with the COVID situation, things had other plans, and kind of ended up coaching in college, went over to Seattle at Driveline Baseball Performance Company out west. They got an opportunity with the Astros. So it was one of those things where I'd kind of left baseball to go pursue something completely different. But now I work full-time in baseball, and I just know way too much about medieval history, and I never use it. So.
Well, listen, the storytelling art is a big one. I'm sure you can try and tie in some storytelling from your historical knowledge into why it's important for hitting and stuff. So I look forward to trying to get some stories around that. For people that maybe don't know, and me included, what does generically, I guess, a baseball staff actually consist of? So if you were going to go to a minor league team or major league team, how many staff members are there? Kind of what are their roles within it, very generically?
Specifically in player development, you're looking at, you have your manager, you have your hitting coach, you'll have your pitching coach, you'll have your development coach, and then you have, strength coaches and ATs and mental performance and things like that. But specifically inside of the player development department where I work, you're going to be specialized on, I guess, would be categorized as different sides of the ball, focusing on the hitting end, fielding coaches, development coaches usually fill that role, but hitting coaches have done that as well. Depending on, the specialization of, outfield, infield play, catching coaches. Then you have your pitching coaches that are, focusing on that. So it's kind of divvied up amongst the staff. But if you go to pretty much any affiliate, you're looking at, a manager. Some have a bench coach, some have a development coach. Sometimes it's the same person, as well as a hitting coach and a pitching coach.
Perfect. And so when you're looking at it from a collaborative point of view, that's a lot of people in the building, I imagine, who want time with the players or want to work on different strategies, etc. How do you process that, and how do you work out going, right, this is our schedule? Because one thing I am really conscious of in baseball is the number of games that they play is crazy. How do you guys actually work collaboratively to say, right, we're going to allot a bit of time to work on hitting here, or we're going to do some outfielder stuff here, or fielding work? What does that, I guess, generic process look like?
I think speaking at the complex level, it's kind of two different challenges, because like obviously if you go to an affiliate, so like the lower minors, higher minors, or even like the major leagues, the daily schedule with gameplay, because they're playing, upwards of over 100 games, there's a lot of frequent travel. That presents a slightly different challenge than at the complex level, where the road trips aren't necessarily that long. We have a 45-minute ride to Port St. Lucie to play the Mets. Outside of that, everything's pretty close. But ours is more centered around the player development aspect of it versus affiliates, where, there definitely is player development constant from bottom to the top. But obviously the allocation changes when, you have to have guys ready to play, the travel's involved and things like that. I think the communication between the staff is key. I mean, I've got a really good staff down here, working with me at the complex level. And I'm lucky enough to have a manager that kind of lets me do what I want when I want all my crazy stuff. But, I think working together with, strength departments and, close collaboration with the athletic trainers, making sure that, we're getting the most out of guys and they're still getting their rest. Because once you start overworking them, any kind of training economy is kind of wasted. So just making sure you're smart with the allocation. So you're getting the most out of the time you have. Knowing, when you have to take a step back, when you can, extend the time out and get a little more aggressive. with the practice schedule and the things that you're looking for. So for me specifically, swing counts, and even as silly as just being outside in the sun, just because we're in Florida, July and August it gets pretty hot here.
Yeah.
So if you're on the field too long, they also have their strength programming, their conditioning, the fielding, the 400 other things they're doing. So just making sure that you're putting what you're doing in context with everybody else, I think is pretty important. Just to make sure that you're maximizing the time that you have, but also realizing there's tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that, and kind of taking more of the long viewed approach to player development for a lot of these guys. Because players I have are majority are kind of 18 to 20. So you're looking down the road. Yes, you want to get better now, but you're looking to get better next week after that, next season, next month. So
if you talk about it from, I guess, a fortnightly perspective, what would a schedule traditionally look like for players within this program? How many games would they have over those 2 weeks? How much S&C or physical stuff would they do? How much time would they spend repping hits? Yeah, what would that generally look like over a 2-week period?
Down here, like I said, the travel isn't as intense. So again, we can be more aggressive than an affiliate who might be taking 2-3 hour bus ride at the beginning or end of the week to wherever they're going, unless they're playing at home. And then they're playing night games 6 days a week, versus us, where we could play anywhere from 4 to 6 days a week. Sundays are our off days. If we have a camp day mixed in, we can solely just focus on training economy, but also take into account what they were doing in S&C over the course of the week, whether they're on their high, medium, or low days, whether we might have gone into extra innings. We played a 5-hour game one time. The thing about baseball that you don't have that issue in Premier League football or just football in general is there's a time limit. For us, there isn't. So sometimes we play a 2-hour game, sometimes we play a 5-hour game, especially at the lower levels where guys are still developing, guys are still learning. Innings can get drawn out. So things like that, where you're taking that into account in combination with all the S&C stuff. And I think that's where the collaboration piece comes into play, to make sure that you have that departmental communication to say, hey, all right, you need to get this done. I can bang this. I'll move this to tomorrow, or I'll move this later in the week. Or, hey, I really need this. Is there any way we can kind of trade back and forth in terms of perceived training economy, swing count? Because there's only so much time in the day. And you also want to make sure that, guys are not getting hurt, because in addition to developing long-term, they also have to be ready to play. So that's the kind of juggling act that I think any, performance or sports coach and in any major sport has to deal with guys as they're looking to develop them and get them on the field.
And in terms of swing counts, are they normally measured kind of day to day? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? How is that measured to make sure that, I guess, you're keeping on top of their workload and not overworking them or undercooking them? What does that look like?
I think in tandem with what they're doing, in the other kind of phases of their development, whether fielding, the S&C stuff, even in the classroom, because at the complex level, like, you still get guys taking classes learning English. So a lot of these guys come over from Dominican Republic, from Cuba, from Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rican guys, usually their English is a little bit better. I've been pretty fortunate with a really talented group of really young guys, but also at the same time have picked up English very, very quickly. Probably helps that my Spanish is okay at best. So they listen to me talk all the time. But I think in terms of swing count, it's like a day by day kind of situation. Obviously those swings add up. And then, like I said before, like, especially in combination with what they're doing, throughout the day as well. The hitting aspect of what they're doing is big, but they are dedicating different training hours to being on the field, to base running, to strength and conditioning. So just making sure that, with whatever we're doing, how much output we're exerting, those can fluctuate. Seems like kind of a non-answer, but at the same time, like, it's all just depend on the situation, with what we're doing as well. How high intent days are we going? And that's pretty much across the board. So you want to make sure that, especially on the S&C end, when they're measuring guys and kind of getting a gauge for where they are in terms of output for the day, for the week. Because again, they still have to be ready to play while also keeping an eye on the future and looking to develop these guys into creating, major league value.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. If we move on to, I guess, the hitting side now, I'm going to come up this from, I guess, a golfing perspective because it's probably easier for me and a few others to understand. If I were to say to you, what's the purpose of a hitter? What are they trying to do? Can you kind of define that for us? If I give it to you in golf, for example, I wouldn't say in golf your role is to try and cream the ball as far as you can every opportunity. It's kind of having good flow to your swing, certain principles that you align in terms of body rotations or whatnot. To obviously try and get the ball controlled as far into a certain direction as you can. In a hitting perspective for baseball, what would you say, I guess, the underlying principles that you try and identify in players to say, yeah, we think that he's got a base level of raw talent to allow us to work with him moving forward?
I think if you broke it down into kind of three categories, the decisions that you're making at the plate. It's obviously in terms of golf, right? Not necessarily golf. I think cricket probably might be a little bit more relevant just because the ball's in motion and it's not always in the same place. Just the inherent value of like what you're choosing to swing at. Because baseball has counts, ball and strike counts, 4 balls a walk, 3 strikes and you're out. Being educated and strategic in what you're choosing to attack. That's going to be a major aspect of it. Your bat to ball skills. What is the quality of the contact that you're making? Your ability to put the bat on the ball. And then the exit velocity, bat speed component to it. The big thing is like, you don't want to be swinging too hard. It doesn't matter how hard you hit it if you're hitting it in and out or whatever. The kind of generic like, I guess, talking head kind of commentary of like old school baseball. But harder hit balls have higher value. So at the end of the day, you're looking at guys and how can you best, increase these 3 areas, or where can you trade off if you have 2 out of the 3. Obviously, bat speed is going to play higher than the both of them because you can get away with more things. You can get away with more mishits. You can make worse decisions if you hit the ball harder because inherently it has more value. But when you're going about kind of developing guys and you're looking at that aspect, you're trying to look to see how you can, take a guy's current skill set, increase it in a certain area, or, hey, is this something that we need to move away from and we just focus on another aspect of it? Do we, target one area? Because each has a kind of threshold of success at each level. Obviously, if you can't get over a certain point, and that's where the bat speed, exit velocity kind of comes into play. The highest level, there's only a couple guys that have success on really low ends of that spectrum. But the reason why they have success is because they have extremely high or outlier abilities in the other 2. So when you're going about, at least with me, when you're going about like in the hitting end, those are the 3 areas you're looking at and kind of evaluate how can you maximize, an individual's potential in all 3 or, even several enough to create, major league value or enough value for a guy to, have success at the next level.
Yeah, I think we'll talk through those 3 because I think they probably present quite interesting topics. So if I was to view and analyze an MLB hitter, what would I expect to see in terms of bat speed and exit velocity? So what ranges are we talking about? I know obviously pitches at the high ends can go early hundreds. You're probably looking around the 90 miles an hour, depending on if they're throwing heaters or off speed, etc. But in terms of if you've got a fastball coming down the middle of the plate, let's say, and you've got one of your hitters up there, what would we expect to see from their bat speed with the swing and then exit velocity in terms of the ball hopefully going to the fans in the deep?
I mean, that's just going to depend on the player. I mean, you look at the top end, you got, guys like that play for the New York Yankees with Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, Shohei Ohtani, the Angels, guys that have a lot of power, swing bat really, really fast. And then you look at the lower end of the spectrum, and you look at guys like Stephen Kwan with the Cleveland Guardians. His output ceiling is not extremely high, but his ability to create solid contact, his bat to ball skills, his swing decisions, they have to be elite in order to maximize the amount of output potential he has, versus a guy like Giancarlo Stanton with the Yankees. Huge output ceiling and doesn't have to be as precise in the contact he makes. You see a lot of mishit balls for home runs. Shohei Ohtani did it last week. I think he hit a ball, to the opposite field, was kind of sliced, and he knew it was out. And he kind of pinned it a little bit because he knew, even though he did not get all of that ball, he still was able to hit it out of the ballpark. So, so I think it depends on the individual player. Obviously, guys are going to have success with different skill sets. If there was one way to do everything, every club would go after one individual. Baseball is extremely copycat, as I'm sure the Premier League is as well. One team finds something, they might have the advantage for a season, maybe two, before others kind of copy it and follow suit. So I don't think there's necessarily one way to do it. And it's all going to depend on the individual, but how can you maximize, that individual success? And that's something that it's just going to, again, depend on, what the talent output of a guy is, what they're good at, and how you're going to maximize it.
So in terms of like top ends, if you take like a Bryce Harper or a Tani or someone like that, how quickly are they going to get the? If we ignore the decision-making element, which obviously there is because they're deciding which pitch to go at, how quickly are they going to get back from, in the position of almost cocked ready to go to swinging through? How short a period of time is that, or what's the speed of them swinging the bat?
I mean, you're looking at probably upper 70s. Giancarlo Stanton is kind of the bat speed king currently, I believe. He's pushing 80, over 80. So that's the upper echelon, like 99th percentile of guys. In that area, that's why those guys are MVP caliber players. They put up MVP caliber numbers. Their output ceiling is exceptionally high, and then you combine that with they're very good at the other things too. So when you have players that excel in those three areas, even when they're kind of lacking in one area, might not have made the best decision, might not have hit the ball, as flush as they should have. They're still maximizing the potential outcome. So even, on those balls that they do not hit perfectly, even on the pitches that are not the best to swing at, they're still having very, very high outcomes. And that's what allows them to put up the numbers they do, versus, certain guys where they have to be a little bit more granular in terms of their decision-making process, the consistent quality of the balls they're putting in play, in order to maximize what potentially could be the outcome. So guys like, Bryce Harper, Shohei Ohtani, these are guys that are the upper echelon of hitters in the game. So, they're probably pushing, 75 plus, 76 plus, in terms of miles an hour bat speed, and kind of going through, and just by the pure physics of it, obviously the faster swing the bat, the harder you hit the ball. So, every 1.2, every mile an hour bat speed you're adding about 1.2 miles an hour on the EV, kind of assuming flush contact. And that's going to vary also depending on, incoming pitch speed a little bit. And then as well as the density of the wood you're using in order to transfer that bat speed into exit velocity. So the physics bit comes into play a little bit, but with these guys, at the pinnacle of the game, they have those outlier skill sets that allow them to have that success.
And is that something you can develop? So you look at the bat speed and stuff, and I imagine, you mentioned earlier about having some 18-year-olds coming out of college or essentially high school players coming in. I'd imagine that their frame's going to be a lot slighter, generically speaking, and they're not going to have the experience of I guess going against major league pitching, etc., but also just having more muscle and whatnot. How much speed can you develop into bat speed if you have like an 18-year-old who has relatively good bat speed? By the time they made mid-20s, is there a discernible difference that the S&C department can put in place, that hitting coaches can put in place?
I mean, it's it's kind of the thing where you're developing a guy physically, as they mature, as well as the movement quality of them on the hitting end in terms of, sequencing of their body, movement efficiency, like I said. So it's kind of twofold in that, where, you on both ends, you're making gains on guys. Obviously, there's no defined number as like, oh, you can always add 20 miles an hour bat speed to this kid. It's going to depend on the individual. Those are things you 1,000% can increase in terms of how much you can increase. It's going to obviously depend on the situation and, what kind of athlete they are as well. But yeah, I guess the short answer is no, yes, you can. But, just like not necessarily equivalent to the Premier League, but, you have the training academy and you're bringing guys up, with baseball, especially on the hitting end, like the scale of competition and being such a reactionary component of the game where, with pitching, if you have the repertoire, if you have the velocity, if you have the shapes, if you have the command, that's going to scale a lot easier because you're in control of the outcome a little bit more versus, when you're hitting, it is in response to, the ball being thrown to you. So the talent level of guys you're facing from, the complex league all the way to Major League Baseball is enormous. So, you're scaling guys and develop them as you go along. So it's not necessarily like, all right, if we do X amount of things, like this guy's going to go from here to here. It takes time for guys. Some guys are phenomenally talented and shoot up the system. Other guys take a little bit more time to develop. But that I think is the interesting and the fun part about the player development side of the ball and being hitting coach is, you have guys where, you have a strong sense of, all right, this guy's going to be really successful, but he just might need more time. And then you have those other guys that, all right, he develops this one part of his game. I think he's really going to click and kind of shoot up the system. But baseball's hard. So, I mean, even those guys, when they go up there, they might hit a wall. And even the most talented guys hit a wall. So, you hope that it happens sooner rather than later so they can kind of get over the hump. But, baseball's hard. Like even the best players at the upper echelon of baseball still struggle at times. Bryce Harper struggled, Shohei Ohtani struggled. Even guys that are phenomenally talented have little bouts of not being successful. And that's where like the kind of three components we talked about come into play because you're trying to make yourself as successful as possible. Baseball's a weird sport where like I can hit a ball 115 miles an hour and that doesn't guarantee me anything because if I hit it and someone's standing right there and they catch it, I'm out. Nothing goes on the box score to signify that, oh, I hit it really hard. Now, if you get a little more granular in terms of advanced metrics, yeah, your hard hit percentage goes up, your barrel percentage might go up. But that's the toughest part about, developing guys at the earlier end of their career or the early beginning of their career, I'm sorry, is getting them to understand that and not always correlate, the outcome with, all right, that was bad. Because, you got an 18-year-old kid who's in a ball 107 miles an hour and lining out to one of the outfielders. You need to get him to understand, hey, man, that was fantastic because you hit that ball foot to his left. You got an extra base hit, but you just hit it at him and he just happened to be standing there. So, that's probably.
How do you do that? Because, yeah, I think that's a really interesting notion because if I put it into a football coaching context, we get this quite a lot with when people score goals. So people will score a goal and you're actually like, that was a poor technique for you to score the goal, or the goalkeepers should have been in position to save that. So trying to remove the actual outcome from the process at times can be really, really difficult. How do you go around that with hitters? Because I can imagine, for me, hitting is one of the hardest things in sport, I believe. I think the idea of having a pitcher throw in, 1 minute a slider, then a fastball, on the inside of the plate, and then wherever, it's just so difficult with the reaction speed of it. So how do you work with individuals to help them understand that, listen, there's a process behind this, and that actually you need to focus on the process rather than the outcome all the time? Because if you just focus on the outcome, you're gonna either one, get kidded by like the Otani example you gave earlier, where he sliced one, now it's gone out of the park, but he knows full well that actually that wasn't a clean strike, and on another night that might get caught out in the outfield, or you've hit it, there's a misfield, it's allowed you to get on base. How do you actually get players to remove the outcome from the process to allow them to focus on hitting clean strikes or making good decisions around which pitches to go after?
Um, that's the thing. Like mishitting the ball is not necessarily like the bad thing because it's going to happen. Like it's. I think if you chase perfection in baseball, you're gonna lose your mind. Like you can't. There's too many on the hitting end. There's too many outside factors that like if you expect to just make flush contact all the time, you're either playing in a league where the competition is so terrible that, and even then you'd still miss the ball every now and again because you're hitting the ball with a stick. But for guys like that, especially at the complex level, and you have a lot of Latin kids, guys from the DR, where they love things like batting average, and that's heavily predicated on just you getting a hit. It doesn't really have anything to do with how well you might have hit the ball. You might have hit the ball popped the ball slightly over the shortstop's head at 74 miles an hour and just kind of falls in for a hit. Is that better than hitting a line drive to one of the outfielders at a really advantageous launch angle at really advantageous speed of, let's say, like 108, 110. And it's just one of those things where like you just happen to hit it at a fielder. Getting guys to understand that is definitely a learning process. And it takes time. Like, I have guys down here that, are standing at the plate. They're making really good decisions, but the human element of the fact that there's umpires, sometimes they call balls strikes and sometimes they call strikes balls. And, you combine that with the fact of, let's say a guy just continually keeps hitting balls really hard, but just at people, at all the advantageous angles and velocities that you're looking for. He's making all the decisions that you want him to make. But me as a 32-year-old hitting coach can say, all right, you're doing a phenomenal job. This is great. And I can be really excited. Every metric we have to measure, all these processes that he's doing are phenomenal. But at the end of the day, he's an 18-year-old kid who's solely focused on the fact that I didn't get a hit. I just got called down strikes. What the hell? And then, he might flick a ball over somebody's head and then he gets hit and he's all excited. So I think going about and how you teach guys, how you approach that process is really, really important. As well as celebrating those like kind of dinky little hits that flip over the top. That's something that, I try to make sure that, you acknowledge those as well, because they're still hits. You can have fun with it. I try to kind of turn those into a joke when our guys do them. And I also make sure I go out of my way when, guys are making really loud outs, making really good decisions and the outcome isn't always positive, to make sure that say, hey man, like that was phenomenal. Hey, this is really great. Making sure you're in constant communication with them to show the progress that they're making. As well as highlight the fact that like even the players at the top part of the game or some player they might really love, say, hey man, like this happened to this guy. This is how this guy does this. And it's just a maturity aspect as well, especially when you're working with guys coming from Latin America that, are very young, put a tremendous amount of pressure on themselves. And also just, in terms of the education piece, like these guys don't always have the same formal education as US counterparts, or they're in the process of getting their education. So, just the maturity aspect is developing as well. And I think making sure that that doesn't get lost in the fact that, yes, you're a hitting coach, but, especially at this level, you wear a bunch of different hats. Even at the highest levels, you're always going to be part performance coach, part psychiatrist, part,
Agony aunt.
yeah. So basically kind of the same deal. So, not to get too far away from the question you asked, but I think it's just about making sure that you don't forget the position these guys are in, how hard it is. And then also the outside factors of just life and the fact that, they're kids and they're learning. And that even when they get older, it doesn't get any easier. The game scales and gets harder, or is it just as hard? And just the talent around you is even better. So just making sure that you go through and you're very specific, with your approach to educating these guys as well as praising the things that are really great, and kind of taking a moment to laugh at the stuff that you get away with. And it's a long road. It's not a quick fix. It's not I'm sure they have this equivalent in um, youth football coaches over there, or like the private lesson scene, or the private world as they do in baseball, where it's like, I'll come in for this weekend and we're going to fix everything for your tournament. It's like, no, you're not. Movement changes, adaptations take a long time to take hold. The development process is long term. There are short term wins, but making sure you're celebrating those, because they're going to be kind of the baby steps towards the long term approach that you should be taking with guys and their development.
And would you be explicit in terms of like your expectations of them, and are they individualized? So if you have like a 6'4" outfielder, would your expectations in terms of swing patterns or timings, etc., be different to a, I don't know, 6 foot shortstop who's gonna, is maybe like, it looks like a pit bull compared to the other one who looks like really rangy, really thick? How specific do you go with those players? Is it individualized, or do you have some underlying principles that you go, right, as a club, we're going after these are the things I want to see at bat?
I mean, I can speak for myself. Like, I'm not going to necessarily speak to the Houston Astro stuff, but just in terms of myself, like, I think you're looking to develop the individual. Guys are not always the same, especially that. Like, it's like when you compare kind of a guy like, I don't know, Aaron Judge and Jose Altuve. They're completely different body types, completely different abilities, just kind of completely different people in general. So you're looking to maximize the individual. Obviously, the short term goals are going to be slightly different, but that's like in any kind of player development piece. Like, I'm sure, like even on the football end, you have your ultimate long term goal, but in working with anybody, making that goal attainable through short term goals for buy in, for the process, for kind of celebrating those kind of little wins on your way to the bigger picture, and making sure you have that buy-in during the training economy. I think is really important. So you want to individualize that in any regard. So guys are creating measured success, and they can see it too, especially in baseball, where failure or statistical failure is such a huge part of hitting. The younger players and even the older guys, like it's tough. You can be hitting really, really well, but see very little success in terms of counting stats. You could be getting those counting stats, but get away with kind of weird outcomes and weird decisions. So making sure that you celebrate the small wins, while also measuring kind of the incremental success towards those bigger goals for those individuals. I think that's probably the most important thing.
And I guess, speaking from it as an industry expert, how do the best players keep longevity in the game? So if it's anything like cricket that you brought up earlier, what I tend to find when I watch is every bit of analysis is done on someone's swing or batting technique, which means when you get someone new on the scene who comes in and scores a few hundreds or hits a few home runs, the next teams up are looking for ways to try and exploit that batter and figure out something that they're not able to do. You look at the Ashes at the moment with Travis Head. England have basically gone to a thing of gone, we're just going to bowl really short at him. We don't think he can play the short ball, so we're going to bowl short. I'd imagine you'd have similar in baseball, where it gets analysed that an individual cannot cope with a curve. They cannot do it, they can't pick it, or the swing timing goes off and then they ground out to someone and allows them to get picked off at first. How do you I guess support individuals to not have those glaring holes in their game? Because I can imagine that what happens is, if you go to the top level, you get found out, and then you don't end up being a all-star, you don't get the big contract because you've got this glaring need. So the top individuals, how do they, I guess, navigate that type of that type of dynamic where they're constantly having to improve or adapt their game to not get found out.
Yeah, I mean that's just like the constant game of adjustments within baseball. Obviously the great part about having all the data on my end is kind of the crappy part is that the other team has all the data on their end. So, as guys are kind of going through and, that data is available on guys at the lowest levels is the highest levels. But the difference between those guys at the top is how quickly they can make those adjustments. Is it week to week? Is it game to game? Is it at bat to at bat? Is it pitch to pitch? So, being able to, understand, how guys are going to attack you, how you're going to find success. Is it something that, okay, are we going to, attack this in a development piece of like, all right, you're going to learn how to do X, or is it something where we've reached a point where it's like, all right, we just got to learn to lay off that pitch. It's not something we're ever going to have success with. So, that's the biggest, outside of those kind of three components of, the inherent skill bit of hitting, how quickly are guys making decisions? I'm sorry. How quickly guys are making those adjustments and adaptations. So you've guys at the major league level doing that at a much more rapid rate than the guys at the lower levels.
And do you think that's a skill that can be developed? So do you think that's something that, at 18, they might have less success with it, but actually you can train them in certain ways or give them exposures to certain type of pitches or something that allows them to be able to adapt quicker? Or do you think that that's something that the best players just figure out ways to be able to adapt when they need to?
No, you 100% can train those things. I mean, that's, kind of going through and how you develop players and the kind of environments you put them through, in terms of focusing on, how you're developing the individual player. Are we putting them in environments where we are encouraging skill development and growth, or are we just putting them in environments that are so easy just so we can feel good about the fact that like, oh, look what he's doing in practice. Baseball is exceptionally hard, but that's like any sport, especially, even in football. Like whether it's in small sided games, whether it's may not necessarily translate to baseball, but in the football regard, how you're challenging these players, in whatever aspect you're looking to focus on, whether it's that decision-making piece, the movement quality piece, how they're going about attacking a defender. These are things that you're trying to develop in the practice setting, so that the in-game moments become easier. Because that's ultimately the goal of any practice is you're practicing something to make the games easier, not to be good at practice, but to be good at the games. And that's something that comes, as these guys age and train and get better. Some guys pick it up a lot quicker than others. And that's where you see some of these guys having, more success than the guy next to them, is because they might have the exact same level of ability in terms of what they're capable of and talent ceiling. But, this guy's able to access more of that in terms of his understanding of, what is happening around him, how our pitch is going about attacking him, how they're adjusting to the situation. Big thing is, if you keep failing doing the exact same thing over and over again, even if you fail trying something new, especially these younger ages, I love that with those guys. I want to see them try to recognize, okay, I'm not having success with this. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try this. This is going to be a different, attempt at figuring out how I can, beat this pitcher in this situation. So, it's something that you can develop in every player, but obviously just like in every sport, some guys are a little bit more quicker in terms of how they develop that piece than others.
All right, second to last question, just going on this because I'm conscious of time, but I think that's a really interesting dynamic that you've mentioned there in terms of that adaptation piece. How challenging has it been for you to have those statistics that you mentioned earlier and encouraging players not to get like paralyzed by analyzing and kind of having a feel for the game? Because I'd imagine it'd be really easy to kind of go up to a pitch and go, right, I'm playing this pitcher, he does this 56% of the time on his first pitch, and on his second pitch he goes here. And so I've got I'm almost creating a storyboard in my head as a hitter to go, right, he's going to do this, rather than going, actually, what am I seeing from him in front of me at this game right now? So how challenging has that been for hitters, or is it something that you feel like the other way where they haven't fully integrated with the stats yet, and actually you have them, but they just kind of play what they see?
I think it's dependent on the maturity of the player and the individual. Like, the older guys might want every single piece of information. Some guys are very specific in what they want. I think when you're developing guys, it's great to have all the data. I came from a background where, the data is very heavily used, like prior to even coming into the Astros. But, in terms of my specific personal approach of how I go about it, like, it's going to depend on the individual. And obviously there is very much the reality of overloading somebody with just too much stuff. Because at the end of the day, like, they still have to go up there, and I was kind of say, they just, like, I hit a ball with a stick. So like, in terms of preparing a guy, and giving them the best chance they have to succeed, in giving them as many advantages as you can without overloading them, and then it just becomes a disadvantage. I think having all that data is always going to be more beneficial than not having it. Especially like you said, when they become kind of consumed with the stat line, because the box score, the generic box score of any game, doesn't give you anything close to the real contributions of a player. And I think that's where those advanced metrics and all that data is a huge help, because it lets as a coach, it lets the players know, in terms of how you relay that to them, that they are having success. It's just not in that generic box score, but you're still doing all the things we're asking you to do. You're still getting better. These are still exceptional. Like, the success on the field is going to come. You're doing all the things. And then in terms of like the actual hitter pitcher matchup, you have all those tools, but that's the other part of coaching. You have the practice development aspect of the individual players. Then you also have that in-game coaching aspect, of how you're relaying that information to them and how you're providing them the best environment they can to succeed. And sometimes that means pulling the reins back on stuff you're sharing. Other times it means, hey, if you need this to be successful, here's X, Y, and Z. If you're this kind of guy that only needs to know these two things, here you go. So I think that's the other part of the nuanced part of it, is just making sure that you're coaching the individual, because not every player is exactly the same. Baseball, you get a lineup. Not every player is going to need every bit of information. And, those older guys, some of them do. Some guys at the top level want to know absolutely everything. But it's all just going to depend on the individual, especially the age too. Like, if I got a team full of 18 to 19-year-olds, they're not Alex Bregman, a big leaguer with the Houston Astros. Like, they don't need to know every single intricate detail, especially at the lower levels where guys are, developing pitches and working on game plans. Those usage rates might not be relevant at all to what they're doing today versus what they did the last start they were out there. So, it all just depends.
Perfect. And last question from me, which is, if I were to speak to the players that you work with, how would you hope they described you in 3 words, and why?
I'd be, I think a lot of them would be really excited to speak English, because they always demand that I speak. Stop my attempts at Spanish. I would hope that, I think any coach, I would hope that they would recognize the amount of effort I put into making sure they're successful, and that they're given every advantage they possibly can. As kind of working in sports, you're always working way more hours than if you were just working a desk job. The same reason why you love it is why it drives you crazy. So I would just hope that, they would know how much effort goes into making sure that they're successful. And then I'm right there with them, in terms of their failures and their successes. And, I kind of feel that just as much when they're struggling. Sometimes I might bother me more than it bothers them. You can't show that, but, you want to make sure these guys are successful, especially when you're in a position where you have that knowledge and what a guy's capable of. And, you want to make sure that those guys are reaching their potential and achieving the things they want to achieve. So, I don't know if that's necessarily 3 words, but I would hope that they just know, that I'm in it right there with them. The running joke that I like to make at work all the time is you just care too much. So that is what I would hope. But
we'll go care too much. 3 words, nice way to finish.
No, I wouldn't want them to say that. That's more the joke that I kind of have with my coworkers, just when you drive yourself crazy a little bit.
No,
but
no, perfect. Listen, Andrew, really fascinating insight into the hitting world and stuff. And I think for me personally, some really interesting bits around, the processes, the outcomes, which I think is a big one, which a lot of people struggle with in terms of understanding how that fits into work, and that that development piece, particularly with statistics that are becoming more and more prevalent in football. I know obviously baseball probably got a little bit more advanced on that early on for a variety of reasons, but they're coming into football more and more. So how we can actually utilize those to support players' development, I think, is a really interesting one. But really appreciate your time. Hopefully we can catch up again soon.
No, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.